I saw a meme the other day on Facebook, and it said, if you hear someone mispronouncing a word, it's because they learned it while reading a book. I thought to myself, I wonder how true that is. I mean, I can see it being a practical reality for someone who's never heard a word spoken out loud, and so they just read it in a book and they think, well, this must be how it sounds. Whether the cadence is wrong on the inflection or the verbiology of how it should be accentuated. Where do you put the accent? On what syllable of the word do you put the accent? Does it end with the Latin way of ending with O or A as opposed to an E or a silent E? All of these are the kinds of things, the mistakes that you could make if you learned a word by reading. But that's an entirely different problem than the problem that arises when someone uses a word that either has never been used before or intentionally they use a word so that in the context of what they're speaking, they can change or imply a change in the meaning of the word. Now, leaders know that language is important. Making words up is dangerous, but communication is one of the number one keys for being a great leader. That's what I want to talk about today on Leading Leaders. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And if you've ever been around someone who has an authoritative voice and a position of authority, maybe they have boss, manager, leader, professor in their title, maybe it's congressman, representative, or president of whatever. If they have that authoritative voice and they have that definitive way of enunciating, then they sometimes come across with an air of authority. It appears to you that whatever they say, well, it must be true because the professor said it, because Dr. So-and-so said it, because Representative so-and-so said it, or Senator so-and-so said it. And because they have the weight or the magnitude of position behind them, the implication is they also have the research, the knowledge, the wisdom, the intelligence behind what they have to say. But that's not always the case. In fact, sometimes it's worse than the fact that they don't just not have the knowledge, the wisdom, or the understanding. Sometimes it's worse in that they know for a fact that the word that they're using is inaccurate, incorrect, or doesn't apply. And see, that's where my real question comes in. Is it semantics? Is it wordplay? Meaning, I meant to say this, but I accidentally said that? Or is it a form of manipulation? Meaning, they want you to begin to use the same word in a different way. A good example, we've heard over the course of this last couple of years that words like science have taken on a different meaning. You can actually go into the FDA's archives, if you can find them, over the last, say, 36 months and look up the word vaccination, and you'll find that that word actually has a different meaning over the last 36 months than it's had over the last 36 years. I'm not kidding, look it up. It's been changed. That should be a frightening concept to you. But I'm not just talking about in reference to the last 36 months. I'm talking about the way that our society and our culture lives, what we call a leader, what we call a manager. You know, one of the things that I do as a communicator, as a coach, is I teach a class called the StoryPowerMasterClass. The StoryPowerMasterClass, for some people, is too intense. For some people, they view the Story Power Masterclass as an elevator pitch class because what I do teach people to do is how to communicate a long-form story in a very brief period of time. It's very intentional that I do that because short stories are very poignant and they're very powerful for getting across the point. Poignant and point are related, they are not the same. Poignant and point are related, they are not the same. See, it's really easy to slip up and use the wrong word. Maybe you've heard someone say especially. Well, look up the spelling of the word. It's E-S. The word is actually special with both a prefix and a suffix. Special, especially. It doesn't have any relationship to exception. Nope, those are completely different words. They don't even have the same root. They don't even have the same related meanings. Unlike point and poignant, where there's a direct relationship, expect, exception, and especially are not related. You should know that as a communicator, because accidentally using one word for the other is pretty significant. But recently I heard someone who was testifying in front of Congress use a word that I thought was fascinating. It wasn't just a word, it was a string of words. But when asked if we had a problem with, quote, illegal immigration, this individual refused to answer the question, do we have a problem with illegal immigration? Instead, he said, I think we have experienced and witnessed, you ready? Irregular migration. Not illegal immigration, but irregular migration. And if you say those things fast enough, then you could convince someone to fall into the pattern of using those words, which have an entirely different meaning. In fact, they have an entirely different worldview. Irregular migration insists that migration from nation to nation, borders notwithstanding, is a normal thing. It should be happening. What's irregular about the migration in this individual's worldview is that it's being restricted. It's not illegal immigration, it's irregular migration, and what's irregular about it is that it's being restricted. Okay, so I have to ask, is this wordplay? Is it semantics? You say irregular migration, I say tomato. You say illegal immigration, I say all are legal citizens. Is it wordplay? Meaning I'm intentionally changing the meaning of this conversation by changing the meaning of the words that we're using. What is a vaccination anyway? Or is it manipulation? I'm intentionally using a word, not because I've heard it said wrong, not because I've heard it interpreted wrong, or irregularly used like, I don't know, irregardless. But is it because I intentionally want to change the meaning behind this conversation itself? And as someone who is perceived to have the authority to make that decision, the clout, the intelligence, the power to change that conversation, if I simply start using a different word with a different set of meanings until it becomes the norm, then people will ask, why did we ever use the phrase illegal immigration to begin with? Isn't it all just migration anyway? Don't we all just move about the earth like sands on a beach when the waves come in? Well, those are two entirely different worldviews. One respects borders, language, and culture. The other sees us as a world tribe, a global tribe, where our divisions are more about our skin color and our dialects than anything else. That nationalism is really a thing of the past. The idea of being loyal to a nation, that's a fallacy. It's a misunderstanding. We really should be loyal to the world and faithful to the earth. When we talk about words like illegal immigration versus irregular migration, we have a leadership problem. The leadership problem goes way beyond our ability to communicate and articulate, which we are absolutely responsible for, but it goes deeper into the psychology of what we believe to begin with. See, in the StoryPowerMasterClass, some people would say, well, it's an elevator pitch. No, it's not an elevator pitch. But when you learn how to tell a story in a brief period of time, that 2-minute story can really change the way people view you in this world. True story. And it can change the way you view yourself in this world. True story. And when you can learn to tell a 2-minute story very selectively, very intentionally, connecting with the right kind of people, disconnecting with the wrong kind of people, empowering yourself to be bold and forthright and to speak well of what you know, and simultaneously speaking over the heads of people that you don't really want to do business with or you don't want to communicate with at this moment. You can speak in front of a crowd of 10,000 people and be speaking only to a swath of 200 or 300 in that crowd. Can it be done easily? Some people would call that a dog whistle. That's not an irresponsible way of saying it, but it is an implication. The word dog whistle, the phrase dog whistle, implies something nefarious in your willingness to communicate to a narrow niche. That's not always true. I can't do business with everybody. There are those who look at what I do in the Story Power Masterclass and they say, well, basically it's a Toastmasters class. No, not even close. In fact, I've had people who are 2 and 3 time distinguished Toastmasters who come to the class and say, wow, that was more than I could have ever possibly imagined. I've also had people come to the class and say, oh, well, it's just a little storytelling class. I used to do storytelling when I was in high school. I did speech competitions in high school. Well, you will learn to speak better in public, but it's more than that. Others will say, well, it's where I learned to do my elevator pitch. Again, you could use the techniques learned in the Story Power Masterclass for you better presenting your elevator pitch, but it's not an elevator pitch class. In fact, if that's what you come looking for, you're going to be very frustrated and you're going to find that the content is way more intense than any elevator pitch class you've ever been to in your life. So I challenge people to not use that phrase in describing what they learn in my class, because once you get there, you realize that is not what this is. Some will say, well, it's about neurolinguistic programming. Well, I've had clients who were master neurolinguistic programming instructors, NLP instructors, who after taking the Story Power Masterclass and walking through the coaching sessions said, I never saw communication like that. It's a different way of perceiving and applying communication skills. Now, as a leader, you've got to ask yourself, yet again, to what level am I responsible? To what degree am I responsible for the words that I'm communicating? The answer is 100%. You will be held accountable. It may not be immediate. It may be that you speak over people's heads right now on purpose and you get away with it. Perhaps. It might be that you speak in a way that other people can't understand and they're the ones that feel like idiots, not you. Give me 1 second. I noticed I have an audio problem. Yeah. I don't know when I lost my audio, but apparently it's back. So I guess I'll have some editing to do on this episode. I really wish I knew when I lost my audio, because then I would know what part I needed to repeat. But for those of you watching live, send me a little Facebook blurb so I'll know when my audio dropped out. I'm sure somebody, one of the 3 viewers, was paying attention. When you go to the Story Power Masterclass, you're going to understand that there's a deep value in the words that you choose, a deep value in the words that you use. The stories that you tell are powerful representations of who you are. But using the wrong word isn't just a mistake sometimes. Sometimes it's an agenda. Sometimes using the wrong word cries out to people who say, I'm very particular about the words that you use, and what you're doing is inviting them to a conversation. Sometimes using a word completely out of context that has a different meaning than what you're implying, well, that's a whole different thing. It's offensive. Yeah, did you know? You know, there's a Facebook short, TikTok video, or maybe just a Facebook reel that's kind of floating around where a guy's going through an interview and he is of a mixed race. And they told him in the interview, we want to know how black you are. And he's like, I don't understand. So they give him a litany of questions that are very culturally oriented. And one of them is, say the word, I want to ask you a question. And what they're looking for is to see if he'll say the word ax instead of ask. I want to ask you a question, or I want to ask you a question. That's a very subtle difference. Most people don't even pick up on it, but those who do understand it is a cultural thing, because phonetically the S is in front of the K. It's always been spelled that way. It should be pronounced ask, but culturally, ax is the more common in certain communities. Some would find that offensive. Some would say that's a racial judgment. Some would say you're intentionally calling someone out or making fun of them because they've learned to pronounce the word wrong. No, some people intentionally do that because they know that they're sorting people out. A good example, another good example of that is the word known, K-N-O-W-N, known. There's no reason that that should be more than 1 syllable, but many PhD especially professors that have anything to do with communication or English, pronounce that word with 2 syllables, knowing. Almost like I've been knowing that for a long time, only without the G, knowing. What is the purpose of that? Well, it's probably similar to when I was in the military, the enlisted versus the officers were taught to salute differently. As an enlisted person, your hands started at the leg and your salute came all the way up from the leg back down. Fingertip to the eyebrow, these 2 fingers, tip to the eyebrow, hand at a 45-degree angle, elbow out. Officers learn to salute from the waist, and it's almost a snap from the waist up and back down. And if you watch 2 people pass each other on a military base, you often will see that elbow up first snap from anybody with butter bars and up. And from an enlisted, it comes all the way from the leg. Now, is that intentional? I think so. I think it separates the NCO from the commissioned officer from a distance, whether you can see what their rank is or not. Because in the battlefield, not everybody wants their rank to be exposed. There are no shiny bars in the battlefield. No, everything is subdued. The colors are hard to see, and unless you're up close and personal, you don't know. But from a distance, you could tell if that's a commissioned officer or an NCO. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for using linguistics that separate audiences based on education. There are a couple of people who I read, books that I read that require me to have a dictionary to get through the book. Dr. Randy Weiss is one of those. He has multiple PhDs in multiple topics. And when I read his books, I sit with the dictionary while I'm reading his books because there are places where one word replaces, a paragraph. He's a very intelligent and educated man. Some of the words that he uses in his books, I can't even pronounce. But when you get to the Story Power Masterclass, one of the things that you find out is that communication is all about the audience that you're talking to and the point that you want to make. Sure, you can slip in some things like irregular migration versus illegal immigration. You can change the meaning of the conversation by changing a few words, or even just changing the meaning of the word itself by implication. As a leader, you better know the difference. You better know that the person you're talking to is receiving what you're delivering to them, whether you're doing it intentionally or not. You also should know as a leader when someone else is trying to manipulate the conversation or change that conversation, and what they're trying to throw at you is a curveball. They want you to question what you've thought about something all along. They're going to give you a word with a new meaning to challenge your worldview, not just the semantics of the word you're using, not just a play on words for a little bit of humor. But they're challenging the worldview that you hold and the way that you think by using a word that is a replacement for the conversation you've been holding. As a leader, you better know the difference, both when you do it and when someone does it to you. I encourage you, if you haven't yet, join the Story Power Masterclass. You can find it at StoryPowerMasterClass.com. But come and sit with us for that 6 to 8 hours of training and understand the psychology of story. Understand the application of story, and understand how to extract incidences from your life that become teaching moments with a call to action that can change the way people think, believe, and act in their life. Because that's what good communication is all about. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.